I am joined by the Honourable John Ruddick, NSW MLC for the Libertarian Party. John, welcome to the show.
Nice to see you, Alexandra. Thanks for having me.
Maggie Thatcher, the late UK Prime Minister, was loved and despised in equal measure. She's a politician whose mark on history is so deep and so large that her ghost overshadows the living, breathing political husks that we endure today. Now, I know you're a fan. Why do you love the great Margaret Thatcher?
Well, look, what had happened was England had had very good economic policies up until the 1920s. Started bringing in a lot of social welfare programs. But England had dominated the world in the 19th century because it was all about free trade and low taxes and deregulation, and things just miraculously became prosperous. Now then, the social welfare programs started coming in around the time of World War I, and they just kept increasing. Now, after World War II, Winston Churchill famously lost the election straight away. I just think the British were they just wanted to move on from the big war, and they elected Clement Attlee, who was a out-and-out democratic socialist. He was like Gough Whitlam and really increased the power of the state and, social welfare programs, exactly, etc. Now then, things did not get better. They largely had conservative governments in the 50s, the 60s and the 70s, but they were totally useless, just like the recent Scott Morrison, Malcolm Turnbull government. And then Margaret Thatcher, and they had just sort of accepted that, socialism was going to happen incrementally. Margaret Thatcher came along and she just said, no, we're for free enterprise. We're for entrepreneurialism. We're for small government. And she was just a real conviction politician. Now, she not only had great ideas and great conviction, but she sort of had that undefinable quality called charisma. There was just something about her. Now, you're right. A lot of people hated her. A lot of people loved her. She not only transformed the British economy and brought back British morale, her and Reagan, but she was sort of 2 years before Reagan. They really showed the communist world and the third world the virtues of free market enterprise and free market capitalism. And so Africa, the Middle East, Latin America, Asia, these countries back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, they were, if not communist, they were, democratic socialists, and they were poor. And Thatcher came along and showed how great free market capitalism was. And then all these countries in the third world started embracing stock markets, foreign investment, deregulation, privatizations, and people don't talk about it much, but Africa's had high economic growth for about 30 years. And it's really attributable to Margaret Thatcher. She's the one that sort of showed the way that these things work. So that's why we love Maggie.
Well, you have made it as a political force when they name an entire movement after you. I mean, often compared to Reaganomics, Thatcherism is a conservative philosophy that defined a generation. Its description is not limited to her political choices, but it extends to her character and the manner in which she conducted herself in the political arena.
In the 60s and 70s, the fashion was to say that the long term doesn't matter very much because, as Maynard Keynes put it, in the long run, we're all dead. Anyone who thought like that would never plant a tree. And we're in the business of planting trees for our children and grandchildren, or we have no business to be in politics at all. We are not a one-generation party. We do not intend to let Britain become a one-generation society. Let us not forget the lesson of history. The long term always starts today.
Now, John, we hear a lot of criticisms about Conservatives being negative, but judging from that speech, she was actually quite a positive speaker for the Conservative movement. Do you think we need some more Thatcherism in our modern politics today?
Oh, absolutely, we need Thatcherism. I mean, she had courage and she had conviction and she had charisma, the three C's. And she was magnificent on the world stage. I mean, she was the one that first recognised Mikhail Gorbachev. And she was as anti the Soviet Union as you could possibly be. But she had a meeting with Gorbachev, and she came back and she famously said, I think Mr. Gorbachev is someone that we might be able to do business with. And that was an unusual term to describe a Soviet leader, but she was right. She said, look, this guy here, Gorbachev, he's going to sort of, be our ally in sort of bringing down the evil empire. So, look, she was basically magnificent on everything, and so was Reagan. But, look, the purest libertarians would say, Alexandra, that while the Reagan and Thatcher revolutions were good for a couple of decades, here we are a generation later, and the government's bigger than ever, as we saw with COVID and the global financial crisis and global war. And Reagan used to say, look, you have to fight in every generation to keep freedom alive. The libertarians say, look, do we really want to have to fight in every generation for the next 1,000 years? Shouldn't we get this sort of the size of the government sorted out once and for all? So Reagan and Thatcher were great, but very shortly later, we're back to the 1970s with a really big government. So what the really strictest libertarians say, which I'm very sympathetic to, we should make the government so small, okay, let's say like down to about 5% of the GDP, and then be constitutionally limited to not grow beyond 5% of the GDP, because even you can have great leadership, but before too long, the bureaucrats and the politicians and the careerists and the lobbyists and all the swamp creatures, they will make the government get bigger and bigger. So while I grew up in a household where we revered Thatcher and Reagan. Now I was starting to think, look, they were good, but they could have been better. And that is, we've seen how quickly we can erode the small government state that we have.
What we should do, John, is make a new law that says that all the bureaucrats and all the government has to sit in one building, and if they can't fit in that building, they can't be hired. And so they're not allowed to expand the building. That is the size of the government forever. But when it comes to Thatcher, there was something about her lack of sleep, about her personal diligence, her hilarious quips, her smirking savagery. We're going to call it the character of politics. And when we come back after this break, we'll have a further chat about what really made Margaret Thatcher a great political leader.